Imagine being in the 1800s being poor, having lots of debt, and not having a good life in general. Well, that's how life for most Americans in the easy felt. Especially the figure we will be focusing on the story for today, George Washington Bush. He had to deal more than that. He had to deal with racism even though he served this country as a U.S. Army veteran. This is the true and maybe forgotten story of George Washington Bush. Before we get to the part on the trail, let's talk about his backstory. George used to be a part of the U.S. Army like I said earlier, and also a former worker at Hudson's Bay Company as a fur trapper. George had a white and German wife and 5 sons. George also had to deal with racism and the normal stuff everybody who went on the trail felt. So in 1844, he and his family left to have a better life out west. He also went out with a longtime friend called Michael Simmons and 5 other families with George leading it. Now let's get to the trail and other stuff. Everybody made to Oregon fine, but in the Oregon Territory, racism was there because in the laws there, black people can't settle in the Oregon Territory. When the entire group learned, even though some of them were white, the whole group refused to settle there, so they are on another trail to go settle a Tumwater, and then they were the first ones to settle the first permanent settlement near Puget Sound. Even though it looked like George was having a good rest of his life and his troubles are over. But that's wrong, because when the U.S. boundaries expanded into Washington Territory and Bush's rights in the territory was gone, and he had to move just because he is black. But luckily for him, his loyal friends went to court and have an exception for George's family, and they were allowed to keep their home and farm all because of his friends. In the future, George became exceptionally wealthy and funded trips to the West for other people who wanted better lives. George wasn't like the usual rich person, greedy, but he was very generous by giving food to starving newcomers around where he lived when the area wasn't providing enough food for everyone. Even during tough times for him, he was generous. George's son Owen took over the farm in 1866. And here's a fun fact. He served in the first Washington state legislature in 1889. The Bush family still owns the farm George owns to this day, known as Bush Prairie. This proves that moving benefited him a lot, and even though he dealt with racism and hate, it didn't make him a bad person, especially when he helped people out when he wasn't required to. And his journey on the trail was harsh, but it didn't stop him. Hopefully you learned about something new today, and I'll see you next time.